welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Karen Sims, and I'm with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, and I have two guests with me today. I have Penny Soskins and Joycelyn Landrum Brown, who are from the Race Relations Subcommittee. And the idea for this show came about because Penny and I were at the League of Women Voters, and folks were like, how do we get involved? And I was like, this is such a great resource. And we forget that everybody isn't connected to the coalition, although it has a large audience. And so I thought that this would be a great opportunity for more people to know about your history and your work. So without further ado, I want to just add one thing. The views of and the opinions of our guests are their own, and we're able to do this work thanks to the generosity of the Champaign County Mental Health Board and the City of Champaign. So without further ado, Joycelyn or Penny, who wants to introduce themselves?
I'll introduce myself. I'm Joycelyn Landrum Brown. I am a retired educator. I retired from the University of Illinois in June, and I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. And I've been working with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative since its inception. I don't remember what year that was. Karen, what year was that?
It has been, oh my gosh, right before 2015. So a long time, a minute.
Yeah, a minute. Yeah. So I've been appreciative, and as a retiree, I'm really looking forward to working as a wisdom leader with Trauma and Resilience Initiative. And also been working with the Race Relations Subcommittee since 2015, when I believe that was formed as well, about the same time.
Yeah.
From the Champaign-Urbana Coalition.
Well, I'm going to ask you more questions about that in just a second. Okay. Penny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Penny Soskin, and I've been in town for over 40 years. And I actually got involved with Champaign-Urbana Trauma and Resiliency also at about the same time, 2015. I've been involved in a number of volunteer projects ever since I moved to town. I retired from the university in 2014, and I was a student affairs academic administrator in liberal arts and sciences.
Wow. So, and it's been such a pleasure. These are two folks who are incredibly busy. And so I want you, because I know you've been doing work with the Trauma and Resiliency Group, and both been active with the coalition's Race Relations Subcommittee. Can you tell the audience about the subcommittee? So if somebody hasn't sort of piqued the coalition, they don't know about what you're doing, can you talk about the subcommittee and sort of so I'll let you start there, and then I'll add a follow-up question.
Okay, and Penny, you can chime in anything that I forget. The Race Relations Subcommittee started, as I said, around 2015. At the time when the coalition was breaking into subcommittees to kind of manage a lot of the work that needed to be done. And we started meeting, and initially the first thing that we planned was to screen and have a discussion of this film called Racial Taboo. And that kind of started us out. And then there were book clubs that formed as a result, and different people just kind of spun off on that. Anybody can get involved. We meet on is it the second Monday or the third Monday? Penny?
Oh, third.
The third Monday, sorry. The third Monday of the month from 11:30 to 1. And we've been virtual since the pandemic happened. But prior to that, we would go and break bread together and talk about the issues of the day and plan programs and events and projects. So we've been divided up. We had an assessment this past summer, and now we're divided up into these action groups that are really looking at different aspects of what we want to do, the events and projects we want to do aligned with our values.
Sounds like a lot. I'm going to ask you about all of those things, right? Mm-hmm. So that, the audience can kind of follow along with your journey. So Penny, is there anything else that you want to add about the start of the race relations subcommittee before, and then my follow-up question would be, what's the hope? What's the point? Why do you think the coalition has a race relations subcommittee? Aren't they just about like youth and community violence? And why would they be talking about race?
Okay. So going back, yes, the Racial Taboo was the film that was shown. I think it was shown in about 18 venues or 15 venues. I think it stopped being shown around about 2018 and 2019, something like that. But the Race Relations Committee, as Joycelyn said, sort of morphed out of that. It started with a few people who had been facilitators, I think. The Racial Taboo had been shown in churches, it had been shown at Parkland, it had been shown on the campus. So there was a lot of work already being done. So a number of people stayed on for a community conversation, and that became the Race Relations Committee. And I think the beginning of it was really a lot of self-education. Members, obviously the members were enthusiastic to learn more. So they dispersed around the county and further afield. So some people went to the Crossroads training. Some people went to the YMCA and heard Joe Minarik and Professor Joycelyn Landrum Brown speak at the YMCA. Others joined a breakfast club. Some joined a book club. So there was a lot of activity going on, but it was decentralized. And I think that Joycelyn is right. Until the pandemic came and the meetings stopped in person, and therefore it became a little bit more complicated. So the assessment that took place focused us much more on some hard talks, on a vision, some statements. We needed courage, we needed honesty, we needed truth, and we were working towards equity. So that is our sort of overall goal. How we're getting there, more detailed, and I'll leave you to ask those questions.
Okay. Sounds great. So Joycelyn, can I ask you the follow-up question? So why do you think there is a race relations subcommittee of the coalition? So if I'm out in my house, how do I connect the dots? I'll ask you about racial taboo, but tell me, why do you think the committee exists?
Okay, sorry about my dog.
No, we love that.
So basically, one of the things we realized, and I think it has become apparent, is that people have difficulty talking about race. They have difficulty acknowledging it. And some of the things that we're seeing around the country really attest to that. So what we're trying to do is really create events and programs and provide skills to people to be able to have these difficult conversations about race, racial history, race relations, and all those kinds of things. So that's kind of like has been the goal, aligned with, helping people. So we're planning a lot of different events. Yeah. Did I answer all your questions?
Kind of, sort of. So I'm gonna know more about the committee, but I guess I'm asking you the hard question. So if I am sitting in my living room wondering, why are we talking about race while I think the coalition does a lot of stuff around like youth and community violence? Help me make the connection, right? Like sometimes when you live the connection, you don't understand, like other people don't always get it. So tell me why you're converted.
Okay, well, part of the issue is that racism is one of the root causes in some ways of trauma. And as we're trying to really address trauma, sometimes if people have not dealt with the trauma that they've experienced based on their racial identities or experiences as a racial being in this country and even around the world, we want people to get comfortable to be able to think about race, to understand how it may be impacting their lives or not impacting their lives, and why. Wow. And what is there, like sometimes with the dominant racial group folks, they don't have to think about themselves as a racial being, but people who are visibly are categorized as racial minorities do have to think about their experiences, and it does impact them. And we want to just honor the fact that while race is a social construction, racism is a lived psychological, economic experience that people have.
Wow. So if I'm correct, and then Penny, I'm going to ask you what you want folks to know and what draws you to the work is that you're trying to help people feel more connected and open to each other. And you believe that if we can talk about what's difficult, talk about what people see as sort of sometimes divisive or divisions, that maybe then people will be more open and receptive to seeing a neighbor or wondering what's happening in another neighborhood or community group, and not just sort of demonize or pathologize, but actually sort of see neighborhoods and communities in difference from a much more compassionate lens. That is a beautiful vision. Penny, am I missing anything?
It's a wonderful vision, but it's taking us a very long time to get there.
Okay.
And every few decades, there is an eruption in society. And we're going through one, I believe, right now. I've been on the one race, the harmony bandwagon for a long time.
Yeah.
But the fact is that even in our local community, we have a lot of inequality. We have a lot of injustice, and neighbors do not treat people in other areas of our community as being like them. We have too many of the other, and it does lead to trauma. So, and this has been going on for a long time. In the 1960s, there was a lot of movement, but things have deteriorated in many ways. So we have a lot of young people who are feeling disenfranchised. I think they're feeling hopeless. They're feeling despair. And I think a lot of them feel that no one really cares. And after a while in this business, you tend to feel that maybe people don't really care too much. So a lot of that, I think, is trying to work on language and really learning about the lived experiences of people who do not look like myself and do not have the privileges I have. But I would like to be involved and have been involved in trying to promote a more equitable version of Champaign-Urbana than we currently have.
Yeah.
Can I add one?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yes.
As I think about the ways that people think about talking about race is divisive, and they say, well, let's just pretend like it doesn't exist, or that doesn't work. It's like if you step on some sand and it's there, you can't pretend that it's not there. And particularly for people who have the lived experience of being marginalized as a result of race. So it's very important for us to be able to get comfortable, to learn to talk about it, to understand what our fears are, our emotions around it, what we were taught, and how to unlearn some of that stuff. So those are the issues that we really hope that some of these events and programs are trying to do, is to help people be able to get more comfortable talking about race. One of our colleagues shared with me that when we first started on the race relations, that she couldn't get people in the city to even mention the word race.
Mm-hmm.
And if it came up, people would be so scared. But now she's feeling like that more people are able to say things and make comments, and they're getting educated on their own, things that they weren't taught in school. And I'm seeing that in our book club, that we're reading a lot of different good books and having conversations around that.
So it seems like it's been life-changing. Am I right? Like, it seems like once you get on this bandwagon, it opens your heart. It makes you more compassionate. It helps you feel more connected to the larger community. So it's like academic and intellectual, but it also seems like your involvement is personal. Am I hearing you correctly?
There's two sides. There is building skills to be able to communicate more effectively in terms of understanding and developing meaningful, authentic relationships. And there's an understanding of the systemic nature of the role, the way that racism and structural racism plays out. So both of those things go hand in hand. Has been in the past a lot of focus on just, I have a Black friend, and so I'm good. Just having one person, and being scared of all the rest of them does not mean that you can have meaningful, authentic relationships. So the work that I used to do on intergroup relations, well, I still kind of do it, but I formally did that at the university, was to train people how to facilitate conversations and also to train people how to be in conversations. So we're not beating up on people, which are some of the reports that we're hearing around the country, that people don't want their kids to feel uncomfortable. And I begin to wonder if it's the parents that are really the ones that are uncomfortable when their kids come home and are talking about some of these issues. So I think it's important that we learn how to understand our discomfort around racial differences and to be able to develop skills to be able to communicate with others.
Yeah.
And understand the context and the political, social, economic context in which we are living as it relates to race.
Mm. All right. So, and Penny, do you want to add anything?
Hard to add to that, but
Okay.
but,
All right.
but that's a big charge to do all that.
Yeah, I hear that. So I have a couple more questions, just sort of background, and then I want to talk about a couple projects that I know you've taken on and have worked with, just to sort of bring everybody up to speed. So one of my other questions is big charge, big mission and vision. Tell folks a little bit about the group, because there are two of you, but it sounds like it's, there are more. And is it a homogenous group? Is it a racially diverse group? Give me a sense about what I can expect.
Okay, so it's a little bit of everything. It's not a terribly big group. It's gone through stages of having more people, but one of the great benefits is that we know that anyone who has joined the group in the past is still working in the same areas. They're still working towards the same goals. The working group currently exists probably of about 20 people. Wow. So we have, and we're divided up into, I think, 4 different groups. Some of those people, some of the members have been on from the very beginning. So for anyone who's watching this, I would say that the race relations group needs younger, professional, non-professional, diverse people coming on, either as members or as friends of the race relations subcommittee, to assist, because a lot of us have been around a long time, and it's important that new people come on and share what it is they want to see, because younger people have a lot to teach some of us younger ones, and you two you two are excluded from that group, from the older ones.
You're being way generous. But so there are more of you. Seems like a lot of people are doing the work. There are people of color and Black-bodied folks and white folks all kind of coming together to do this, Latinx folks. So it seems like there's lots of diversity. And the thing that brings you together is the shared commitment to create a more equitable community. And Joycelyn, you said something, or Dr. Brown, you said something that I thought was really interesting, is that part of how you see the work is moving people beyond just an understanding about prejudice, but understanding some of the structures, like how we come to be and what's at play. And I'm imagining, when I think about, anti-oppression work, or one of the benefits of that lens is you realize all oppressions kind of work together. And although race is one construction of oppression, ability, gender, sexual orientation, like all of the oppressions, are a part of this continuum. And if you want to be in a world where everybody can become all that they can be, that we've got to be intentional about dismantling prejudice in others. And Penny, you mentioned this, that trauma seems to create like othering, right? And the more people feel stressed and oppressed, the more they might other. So where you guys started was with this showing of racial taboo. if no one has seen it, and I think that that was quite the win and success, it's why maybe a lot more people are comfortable talking about race. Can you tell people a little bit about Racial Taboo? I know you're not formally offering it, but it might give people spark an interest and help people see a little bit about your journey.
Racial Taboo was a film that was done by a filmmaker independently for his own purposes. We found out about it, and we thought it was a good way to start the conversation. It did talk a little bit about personal stuff, but it also talked a little bit about historical things, which I think is a whole nother issue that people need to address, is understanding that we didn't just get to this place in terms of race relations in a vacuum, that there were historical things that have happened all along, and there's so many things that happen. One of the things about Racial Taboo is that he kind of brought all those things together as a starting place. So we showed them to like the police. I think I didn't go to the first screening, but I think it was the police and a lot of city officials saw it. So my hope, and then I think the person that established it, Amy, was talking about how that now a lot of those people feel more comfortable, at least in terms of talking about race. They're not running away from it. So something that you said, Karen, about it being intentional. There's got to be some intentionality about wanting to develop better, authentic relationships. And so that is, part of what this provides, a space, a container. These events are an opportunity to help people be able to practice some skills and also learn to listen and learn to speak in a way that others can hear you. And, I am a fond proponent of dialogue. So, and everybody uses the word dialogue, but there's a specific way I think about dialogue. And that's through some of the research, the empirical research out of University of Michigan. But then that's a whole nother issue. So with Racial Taboo, the hope was that people would get comfortable beginning to talk about it and using the film as a springboard for that.
Yeah.
Penny, do you want to add anything?
From the point also that these are educational, because one thing I find even today, this week even, that a lot of people don't know really much about the history. I mean, we're not going to discuss, I know, CRT, but people, there's a knee-jerk reaction. But in fact, a lot of people don't really know much of the history. And so that leads to gaps. So although we're not focusing on the history, you cannot divorce or separate the history from what is happening even today.
Yeah. Yeah, I will drift off a little bit. I mean, first of all, critical race theory doesn't get taught. And it's a legal framework and construct. And so all conversations about race and racial history or culturally responsive teaching and learning are not critical race theory. Instead, most of those conversations are just designed to increase understanding and connection and to know about our shared history and our journeys together. And it's just interesting that there's so much, like contraction at this moment for like learning and curiosity and, an interest in how we got here and how we came to be, because that's the beautiful thing about history is that you know what your history is, how not to repeat it, or how to do differently, or you can also celebrate like lots of success, because even when we study the history of race relations or even our racialized history, they're still right. It is not like a monolithic story. There's lots of range of stories and narratives, so that could really increase our appreciation of each other. But if I haven't learned to sort of manage my own feelings of guilt and shame, I might disconnect or need to medicate or numb or deny, which is, a maladaptive coping strategy, instead being open to all of that range of experience. So that's my soapbox. That was a Karen, because I just love history. So I was like, I just can't imagine like not studying about the world, because there's been no period of time that no one person was perfect, and history is just such a teachable. It's so right. There's so much to learn always.
And one of the things that I think about some of the backlash is that I think sometimes if people haven't done their own personal work, then they do want to strike out at people and present information in a way that can be hurtful and harmful. But there are ways to talk about it. There are ways to teach about it. There are ways to engage around these issues without inducing guilt and shame and those kinds of things. And that doesn't mean that you sugarcoat things. That just means that you help people to understand their feelings and what they're dealing with and how they're dealing with it, and how to understand it and how to move past it. And that's the same thing. It's a growth edge, I think.
And I'm also, right, as a mental health professional, I don't want to live in a world where people don't know guilt and shame, because that is not right. That's what keeps us empathetic and not as sociopaths, and like having the full range of human experiences is what makes us human. And I think it would be a setup to say you can only have access to feel good feelings and not the range, the whole pantheon of emotions that keep us connected, that make us uniquely us.
And being able to have the skills to be able to manage and understand those feelings so that you can stay engaged in relationship and in community with others. So one is that there's the individual relationships, and then two, there's the community. And we have to find a way to help people build skills so that they can not only build their interpersonal relationships, but build their communities. We have to work together as communities.
Absolutely.
And that's one reason why I'm so excited that we have a multiracial, multi-ethnic, even religious group that's part of the Race Relations Committee. So it's diverse on a lot of different ways. One of the things that we would like to have is more males.
So I'm going to get there around what you want and what your project. I will say, having sat through Racial Taboo and the discussion, this vision of the world that you both have expressed is what you experience in those conversations. I know that it's what, having talked to Amy, what the feedback has said, that it has been a great container for people to be seen and heard and to be curious and to not worrying about getting it right, but just having, so I guess I want to assure folks who might be interested or might be committed or sitting at home going, I see things around me and I want to be more purposefully involved, know that it's a non-judgmental space where really it's where people are in various stages on their journey, and you guys get a chance to explore together and using great skills. At least that's been my experience. I know I'm, a woman of color, but Penny, has that been your experience, that it's been this open container?
I think absolutely so, and a really big and very valuable learning experience to share so much with others that you wouldn't normally get together with. And therefore, I think for a lot of our community, it's a missed experience, that an experience they're missing by not being more involved in this work.
Okay. So I think we're going to shift. So now you've heard the commercial. If we want to have a more connected, loving, healthy, well supported and safe community, being able to talk about structures that get in the way of that are part of the journey. You said after Racial Taboo, going throughout Champaign County and being seen, and then going into discussions and book clubs, you did an assessment. So talk about the assessment. What drove you to that? And then what came out of it as some of your current priorities?
Penny, you want to speak on that?
Okay, so yes, the assessment, we were led in an assessment, and we did come up with some principles, and the principles were to, as I said, to be working towards equity and empathy, to work with courage, to speak with courage, to act with courage, and with honesty. And those are not always universal themes in this work, because there's a lot of denial and a lot of stepping back. So the group then broke into a number of action committees. And we're all the time trying to raise awareness, raise understanding, but also to bring along with us more skilled individuals and informed groups to spread and expand. So we have a group that is working on.
More questions about that in just a second. Sorry. Penny, do you want to introduce
Sorry,
yourself? Sorry. Okay, I was looking at the chat. Sorry. Keep going.
Okay, so we have a group working on general information and skills, some skill building and some presentations in the community. We have another group working on youth engagement. They're a little bit they're more reserved at the moment because of the sensitivity in schools with COVID, etc. There's another group working through the Prairie Museum in Mohammed, working to create oral histories. And then there's another group working towards community conversations. So in neighborhoods, community conversations in neighborhoods. So that's how we're working at the moment. And each group has its own goals and its own agenda for the sort of the rest of the school year.
Sounds amazing. So one of the biggest questions that you guys have in the chat is around how do you get involved? So if you could say that again, and then I'm going to ask you to explain some of those projects in more detail. But there are a couple people who are like, this sounds like really important work. I want to be involved in it. Can you tell people again about how they can be involved if you feel, again, a couple of viewers are like, I'm really called to do this. How do I find you?
Okay, so I'll go. So if they write my name from the screen here, pennysoskin@gmail.com. Just send me an email, tell me you saw this, or just send me an email and say, how do I get involved with race relations? So we can connect some of the steps, we can connect some steps. So we have, as I say, we have the Race Relations Committee, but we're also developing for those who are thoroughly engaged and committed, but also friends of the race relations. And there are a number of ways to get involved, and we can work on that.
So you mentioned ally, and Joycelyn, I'm going to ask you to join in, but you've mentioned allies a couple of times. What do you mean by that?
There are people who are doing the work in the community, who have been doing the work. And sometimes they connect with us, but they're out there doing the work. So we try to support any allies or affiliates. If they're out there doing the work, we like to know what's going on in the community. And that's one of the ways that they're not necessarily, don't come to all the meetings all the time because the meetings are happening during the day when some people can't get away. But lately, since they've been virtual, then they're really open. I noticed that the link to race relations meeting is on the CU Coalition website events page. So if you really want to just kind of join in virtually, I don't think that we have, I think that it may be open, but maybe you should email Penny. I'm not exactly sure. But since the link is there, I guess anybody can click on it. So affiliates are those who just want some support. One of the things that I found, one of the things that we were doing at the university is that we had a community facilitators. We had a group of facilitators. And so there's a way when you're doing the work that you can get burnt out, or if you're just feeling discouraged and you need some uplift, you can just come and we will provide support and encouragement and maybe even brainstorm ideas with you as well for how to get past some of the barriers that might be in the way.
Wow.
Did that answer all the questions?
No, it sounds like you are busy people, right?
Yes.
And I know you mentioned when we first started that one of your priorities recently was you were having community discussions. Am I right? And then you were also talking about, or did I hear in another space where you talked about the showing of and discussion of open wounds. Can you talk about those two? Where did those fit in the priorities that you mentioned?
Our initiative that we're doing now is we're really trying to have community conversations around the book and documentary Open Wounds, which really
Can you again remember no one knows about it?
Yeah.
So can you
Open
tell
Wounds
people about
is basically a story of intergenerational trauma, where a young man talks about his experience. There was experience where his father was killed under questionable circumstances, and how the family dealt with that or didn't deal with that, and then his awakening and understanding about how that impacted him in a lot of different ways. And then the conversations that he has in the documentary really kind of highlights. He goes and talks to family members, and so it's a way of talking about the ways that, and he's a Black man, and the ways that racialized trauma really manifests or presents intergenerationally. So that's part of the conversation is about racism. Part of the conversation is also we hope is about trauma, intergenerational trauma, wondering how it impacts us. We have a lot of wounds. So just think about the title of the book and the movie, Open Wounds. Many of us have wounds that we have not taken the time to really heal. And sometimes that really causes not only disruptions in ourselves, but disruptions in our relationships and disruptions in our families and disruptions in our community and even nation. So the goal is really for me to, as I think about Open Wounds, is really to get people to understand a little bit more about racialized trauma and understand intergenerational trauma. We're not teaching it, we're just hoping to have conversations around that.
Yeah. So can I ask, why did you choose it? So maybe this is the more conversation. What about that stood out? You mentioned that you started off with this conversation around showing this movie and film called Racial Taboo. And how did you go from racial taboo to open wounds?
Beverly? No, yeah. Well, we were one of the partners that comes to the Race Relations Committee meetings is Beverly Baker, who works for the United Way. And United Way already had a grant where they still had the film available to show. So we thought, well, they're still available. So let's just partner and collaborate with United Way around showing this. So that was how we kind of decided on Open Wounds, because I think it expires in March. So if you're interested in that, there is a sign up. We're sending out letters, and also there's a link, and then there's a sign up for you to view the documentary. So, and then have conversations. I'm probably jumping ahead of myself.
No. So I want to make sure, and Penny, do you have anything else to offer? So one of the reasons why you chose Open Wounds had to do with accessibility. And then, so it was available, it provided a good collaborative opportunity. I know there was some showing of it as a part of the Equity Challenge for last year that the United Way sponsored. And so you kind of primed the pump. But I know Joycelyn, and I'm going to lean to you, Penny. Joycelyn, I know you've been putting together like discussion topics and conversations. What may be, right, like what might be content that you think in this moment might be interesting to people, might generate dialogue that might be good for our community? You know what I mean? Like, tell me. So there's the accessibility option, but I know, having looked at some of the resources you pulled together, there's some whys that you hope people will get from it.
Right. So yes, so we're not looking at it in a vacuum at all. We are looking at it in 2022, when we've just had and are having some very stressful times. We looked at Racial Taboo, but that was a long movie. We looked at Open Wounds because a lot of people are spending time on Zoom and virtually, and really we want people to be talking as much as looking. So the message from Open Wounds is that it is very hard to heal from something that you cannot talk about, that you are forbidden to discuss in public, and you are such pain that you cannot even discuss it in private. So what happens with the 9-year-old son of the grandfather that is killed is that he goes completely off the rails. His son never really understands why the grandmother could never talk about the grandfather. And there were a lot of hidden wounds, the hidden results of this. And in actual fact, when we think about it, if we really think about it, a lot of people have lived through their grandparents or forebears having had suffering in one way or another. It's not something that's just confined to one part of society, but it is very much something that has impacted society, one part of society over the years and still is today. So we have the biological side of it as well, but the idea that people watch open wounds and then discuss it and think about how does this relate today, we think is very important, because there is a lot of hurt, a lot of fear, and a lot of sensitivity around people in our society that live not very far from most of us, but most of us do not speak to in a meaningful and supportive way. So we're hoping to build a few more allies, but also to raise awareness and empathy and understanding and educate.
For me, I think it is very important that we really think about that a lot of what we're seeing in people manifest, their behaviors really result from journeys, experiences that they've had. So one of the trauma questions is not why did you do that, but what happened to you? Mm-hmm. So Open Wounds really kind of explores this idea about, well, helps us really hopefully think about others from a lens of, what has been your life experiences that are causing your behaviors to be certain ways. And I think that that's a lesson that all of us can really kind of learn and think about. And the hope is really where it's focused on race in this case, and there are probably other traumas, as you talked about intersectionality, other social identities where people have been marginalized and traumatized, that they might get some insight and be able to connect the dots. And, the thing that I would like to also add is that diversity is pretty complex, and all of what we're talking about. So it's not like you have a race and it's isolated from your gender, and it's isolated from your sexual orientation, and it's isolated from your religion or your ability status or any of those things. They're all in social class, they're all intersecting. So one of the things that I think is most helpful, particularly when we have white males or people who are from the predominant group, to understand that your social class, even though you may have a white male dominant status, your social class may be very different in influence. So we will have people who are like working class and say, working class white males say, this does not apply to me. Well, your class background causes you to be marginalized in our society in ways that leads your experience to be different than someone who may be a wealthy white male. So I think I'm hoping that some of the things that discussions we can have will help people uncover some of the ways that their lived experiences are creating barriers in terms of them being able to be effective communicators and relators and community members, and be able to, not be afraid to go on certain parts of town or afraid to help certain other people who are different than you. So the hope is to build bridges, not walls.
Yeah. And that seems, first of all, Joycelyn, what a beautiful gift and articulation where you're saying, we're all complex people. We want this is not a othering experience, and that you want folks to know that we, in the space where you're talking about race as one lens and filter, you're acknowledging the full range of experiences. So if you felt like bullied because you were from a more economically marginalized community and you dealt with that stigma and shame, we see you too. And we want a world where those kinds of pains get acknowledged. Or if you had a learning disability or a different physical ability, or maybe you're at a different season in your life, and so you're having changes in your health status, the world that you guys are trying to create, a more equitable and just world, allows for everybody to be seen and needs to be heard, rather than it just being like we're offering some goodies for a select group of people and that other people are going to be left behind. I just think that that is a beautiful vision. Going back to Penny, your comment, right? Like that's a beautiful vision of the community that I think most of us want to live in, where we all have the right to be, become, and belong.
Right.
That's good catchphrase.
Yeah. Well, I can't completely take claim for it. Thomas Hubel, who does a lot of work on collective trauma, he talks about trauma being, creating fragmentation, and that the key is to create worlds where people can be, become, and belong as the, end goals of trauma healing. And I have just sort of captured that because it seems to be so aligned with some of the work that is here. There is so much great stuff happening in the chat. I want to, so Penny, I want to make sure I come back to you because I saw you were nodding. Is there anything else you want to add before I ask a couple more final questions? I know, can you believe we're almost at the end point, but I wanted to open up room for you.
I don't think so, not really. I just think it's important for us to all remember that hurt people hurt.
Mm. Yeah.
And we're trying to reduce the number of people hurting other people in the community. And, a lot of healing needs to be done.
Yes. So before I ask my last couple of questions, I know one of the questions in the chat that I think I can intentionally ask was, Joycelyn, can you say again, how do people find the open wounds video? Because there were a couple like, I want to see it. So how do people find, is it that they contact Penny? Is it that they go to the how would you want people who really are interested? Is it, like where do they go?
So Penny, will you talk a little bit more about the logistics?
Sure. Excuse me. Yes, they can contact me, pennysoskin@gmail.com, but it's also on the letter to view. I believe the invitation to view is on the coalition community calendar. I believe it's there.
And that is in the chat. So know that the letter to view is in the coalition calendar, and that is in the chat. So the link is in the chat. If you're watching this on demand when the show is airing, you can go to the Urbana Public TV YouTube or Facebook page and find the chat conversation, and all of that. Those resources will be there. And we might also create like a little slide to have inserted into the broadcast, because I think it's just such an important opportunity. And wouldn't it be great if you grabbed isn't this your vision, that people would either grab their family or their group or their congregation or, people in their social networks, watch it, discuss it. And am I correct that you've put together a discussion guide to make this easy and user-friendly? Is that the vision?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a 40-minute. It's very short.
So it's a 40-minute video. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that, yes. So like when we send you the link, we also will send the discussion questions. And so the way we have it set up is that individually you can watch it. But our hope is that you will watch it with family members, as you said, friends, or, your organization, your institutions, your agencies, and then have conversations. And if you want someone to come and facilitate the conversation, that's something else that we're really working with. So if you identify that you have a group that you would like someone to come and facilitate, then we would try to accommodate you.
Wow. That is
or in the future, we're hoping to train facilitators to be able to do it themselves. So we want to build as much capacity as we can in terms of people being able to talk about these issues and facilitate conversations around these issues.
That is so beautiful. And I know you're wanting to have folks from a variety of different cultural experiences be open to this. So this isn't just something for white-bodied folks or Black folks or Latinx, like really you're hoping for robust conversations and discussions. So see yourself included in this. So I have sort of a theoretical question. I want to have people find you one more time, but my last sort of theoretical question, and I know you said you did some needs assessment, but in a year from now or 2 years from now, what's the hope and vision for the work? What would you hope would be different?
My hope, I've got lots of hopes, but the two that I can think of right now are, one, I hope that people are able to do their own healing work. And then two, that they're able to heal their relationships. And three, that they're able to then connect and build work in the community. So I think all of us have a charge, I think, to really, work in the communities, bloom where you're planted, so to speak. And you don't have to actually have, it's a ripple effect. So that where you're connected, your networks, that you're able to be a force for good, positive, that you can do, that you model how to talk about these issues in ways that is helpful and, caring and opening for other people.
Wow. Okay, that's beautiful. Penny, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I think my hope is that we become a caring for society, for a community, for our youth, that we understand that our youth tend to copy what the adults do, that we understand that our youth are hurting, fearful, very sensitive, and in pain. We have had two of our members, Donna Tanner Harold and Kim Valdry, were able to go out and have youth conversations pre-pandemic, but they're not able to do that anymore in the high schools. So anything that anyone can do to support our youth, particularly youth of the non-dominant society, and also to realize that, yes, there is violence, but the violence is not something that young people necessarily gravitate to. And we as an adult community must set examples for empathy, courage, and inclusivity. And without that, we are letting our youth down.
Wow, that is beautiful. And I want to, that was so beautiful. And I want to end there, but then I just have one more question and curiosity. So if I'm somebody who, and this recently happened to me, and I'm sitting in my home or living room, and I'm like, but why do you guys keep talking about race when what I see is Black on Black crime or so much inner community stuff, like Black people are doing things to other Black people. It's not white people doing things to Black people. How could you convince, or what could you say to folks who are like on the why do we keep talking about race fence? And I want to go back to a positive end, but I do know that I've gotten that question more often than not recently. Yeah. And so what would you say to folks who might tune in and go, yet again, they're going down this race thing, and why don't they just hold Black people accountable for the things that they're doing to each other?
For me, it's like, I think understanding the root causes. Why are the youth doing the things? And I think some of it is out of either unresolved trauma or around things that have happened to them. Some of it's race, some of it's other things, family life issues. And I think everybody's got healing to do.
Okay.
And so that's kind of like my take. And everybody, and so if we were healing and whole and there were opportunities, I think I heard somebody on the news say this, that there would probably be not as much crime if there were opportunities and jobs and, people felt like they could be their whole self.
Yeah.
And within community,
Yeah.
that would make a difference. So like race is just one part of it. There's all kinds of discrimination and marginalization that people experience. Some around size and appearance. It's about a lot of different things. So I think that race is a starting place, probably like the hardest starting place for some people. And there are also Black people who have not done any process work, as we say, around their own racial identity and whatever healing that they might need. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I think you're saying there's healing that sometimes we focus on symptoms and not root causes, and that it is a conversation for all of us. I love that. Penny, do you have anything else? Because again, you can imagine in community, there's a lot of like, why can't we just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps conversations?
There's always a lot of that, yes. But when you're hurt for one reason or another, whether it's passed down or whether you feel hurt by the broader community, you tend to lash out. And whether it's domestic, and everybody who lashes out to people close to them. People tend to assault or harm seriously people they know. And we've sectioned off our community. So whether it's young people committing suicide, they hurt themselves. Whether it's domestic violence, they're lashing out at the people that they live closest to. And whether it's young men with weapons that society has given and allowed them to have, because that's how it is, whether that happens, then they tend to lash out in the area in which they live, and often to people who are very like them and they share a lot of our common interests with, but we haven't provided the opportunities for growth, education, and real meaningful lives.
Wow. So thank you so much for sharing. That was beautiful, Penny. And so if you're somebody who's sort of been listening into this conversation, be curious about the roots. Penny said hurt people. And so if we're seeing the symptoms of community trauma as being a result of that community's woundedness, maybe a more empathetic and compassionate response. What I do want to offer to all of you, and I hope you hear, is that if you're somebody and you're like, I want to get involved in making my community better. I see what other people see, but you just haven't found your tribe and village. There are people who are doing the work. So there are allies out there doing the work. There are people who want to know about the work you're doing. So they're not trying to co-op or take over your projects. They just want to get people to you or collaborate with you. And it really is going to take a village to heal. And we can't pretend like, these issues don't matter and that we can sort of wish our way away from them. So Penny and Joycelyn, do you have any final thoughts? Because this has been such a pleasure spending time having this conversation with both of you.
I'm just really happy that we're having conversations, and I'm hoping that more people will have these conversations and really, understand their journey and be able to learn to listen to other people's journeys and experiences in ways that they're not defensive, that can provoke some opportunities for growth. And particularly, I'm concerned about the community, us being able to, like I said, build bridges, not walls or barriers. So
I love that. I'm going to be acquiring that. Penny, do you have any final closing words?
Just that I think these responsibilities are societal responsibilities, and that it's a privilege for me to work with both of you. And I hope many more people will take the opportunity to get to know you two better and the work you do, because we're very fortunate to have you in town.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. And for those people who joined into dialogue and discussion, Thank you. Make sure you share this with your friends and get other people to do that. And we'll also make sure that resources exist in the chat. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you.